Well, welcome to another edition of What's So Funny, the show that probes the brains, the minds, the psyches, and the brains of the people who make the funny. Of course, you know Mark Breslin as the founder of the Yuk Yuk's comedy clubs. But did you know he writes a monthly column for postcity.com? And can you imagine Mark playing drag in an opera about Brian Mulroney? And would you believe Breslin's archie nemesis role in the RoboCop series is the second punniest character name behind only De Niro's Louis Cypher, according to funnystuff.com. And now a man who's still suffering the lingering effects of Linsanity, your host and MC, Mr. Guy McPherson.
Kevin, you always make me think that I should perhaps do some research before I have guests on.
Every so often would be a good idea.
I didn't know any of that. Mark?
Those were projects I forgot about.
So there you go. We don't need to talk about them, but you played in drag.
Do you know where Archie Nemesis, where that RoboCop... Do you know where that RoboCop thing is big is in Mexico? When I go to Mexico on vacation, people stop me who live there and say, I know you from somewhere. And
really?
As I talk to them, it turns out that thing plays over and over and over and over again.
Mark, I know you're a pro, but you were just talking about the love of the amateur. So I'm going to get you to scooch into your mic a bit. This is co-op radio.
What do you want me to do?
Our mics don't go all the way to your face.
Yeah. Sorry, I heard the staff goes all the way. But because it's co-op radio. But okay, fine. Tell me if this is good. Is this better?
That sounds great.
All right, good.
Yeah. Well, now I hear you in full force.
All right.
But it's always great to have you. Last time we spoke, we were in St. John.
That's right.
Yeah, in a little tiny hotel computer room.
That's right.
Yeah.
I remember it well.
Now you get the full deal. Yeah, the full What's So Funny deal.
Well, it's a pretty impressive setup you've got here, especially the neighborhood is tremendous if you're a bullet. But that's okay. It's I like it.
So excited to be back in Vancouver.
I like Vancouver. I would live in Vancouver if I could, but the business is really in Toronto. But as a lifestyle issue, I think this city is one of the greatest cities anywhere.
Even though right now, as we speak, about 25 in Toronto and snowing here in Vancouver.
So bizarre.
Yeah.
So bizarre. But, the weather is really in your heart.
Oh, that is poetic.
You like that?
I like that.
Okay, good.
The weather is in your heart.
It is in your heart.
I believe that.
I'd rather be in a place that's, cold climactically, but people are warm and effusive and friendly.
Oh, well, that's not Vancouver.
I don't know. I mean, compared to Toronto?
Okay. Exactly.
And is anyone from anywhere anymore? Which is also the other issue. Everyone you talk to, where are they from? They're from somewhere else. They were born in X and they wound up in Y. And that's just before they go to Z. So, I'm one of the few people who actually was born and raised in Toronto and stayed there.
Yeah, that's always something that I think about when people say, oh, Vancouver audiences or, oh, whatever audiences. I go, well, who's from Vancouver? How can they just change as soon as they arrive?
Well, it's really true. I mean, one of the things of the characteristics of the modern world is the end of the concept of there and here. Because media has replaced here and there in a lot of ways.
We're just one community.
In a sense. But then we break off into minor communities, smaller communities, sub-communities, micro-niche communities. I mean, that's what's happening in comedy, too, for that matter. Since this is a show about comedy, I thought I'd bring it back to the comedy thing.
Yeah. Thanks. I sometimes forget. But the reason you're in town is to open up a new Yuk Yuk.
Yes, the fourth location we've been in since 1988.
What is the problem, Mark?
No, that's normal. In Toronto, we've had 5 locations since our original club in 1976.
5 different franchisees?
Nope, not necessarily. But 5 different locations, just depending on... There's a lot of reasons why you might move a club. You might move a club because your lease is over and the landlord, jacks up your rent. You might move a club because you've been expropriated to build a condo. These are all real reasons why we've changed locations in different places. You might have a fight with your franchisee, and you want to find another one. You move into a different space. The neighborhood you're in might have changed over a decade, and you want to be somewhere where the neighborhood is hotter. That happened in Toronto. That's our recent club is built in the entertainment district because we wanted to be where all the people were for entertainment. So there's all kinds of possible reasons why you could close down and open up somewhere else. Sometimes you do it just to create excitement and interest. Oh,
what?
Yeah,
just because you'll be in the news again.
That's right. We've done that.
Yeah,
in various places.
As long as the location is obviously another good one.
Of course. You never want to go from a good location to a bad location just for the publicity. You would never do that. But there's all kinds of reasons to change it around.
Just speaking about Vancouver, there's been 4 Yuk Yuk. Started on Davie Street.
Yes, and the Davie Street location in some ways, physically, was maybe one of the best clubs ever. But the problem with the Davie Street location was twofold. One, we could only get a certain kind of liquor license in those days where you had to have food. And a certain amount of food before they could sell you a drink. And obviously the customers didn't like that. So that was the first location. The second problem was it's in the gay neighborhood, and there were customers who were turned off by that. I don't think
turned off by the brand of comedy that was no holds bar.
No, turned off by the fact that it's in a gay location on Davie Street.
I thought you meant the locals didn't want it there.
No. Some customers were afraid. We're homophobic and were afraid of going to
Really?
Davie Street because that was 20 years ago. I think things have really changed in terms of the way people relate to the gay community now. But in that time zone, that was a problem. Then we were, of course, in the expo site. And the expo site was probably the worst physical plant for comedy because it was a round room. It had a
sloping floor.
A sloping floor. It had a bubble for a roof. The bar was in the middle of the room. The thing still worked. People still came. But it wasn't great for comedy. So we knew at some point we had to get out of there. And then we opened up in the Burrard Street location. And that was great, and that was fine. But I had a franchisee who was non-compliant. And after fighting with them for so long, I finally said, this is a bad marriage. I have to get out of this. So we got out of the bad marriage, and now we're into a good one. Why did it take 2 years to go from one location to another, you may ask?
I was wondering that.
Well,
I didn't think it would happen. But here it is.
No, I knew it would happen. It's only a question of when, not if. But it's difficult to find a good location in a city like Vancouver where every piece of real estate has been picked over and picked over again. And remember, you're not opening up a restaurant where it doesn't matter if there's a pillar here or an obstruction there or an oddly shaped room. It has to be a symmetrical room. It can't have any visible pillars. It has to be in the right location. It has to be able to get the right liquor license, and on and on and on. And when you take all those factors together, it's not an easy thing to do.
Not an easy thing to do, but you found a place. I went to the soft opening last night, or about a week and a half ago from when our listeners will hear this. It's at Cambie and 12th. Good room. I like it.
Thank you. Interesting room in that no pillars. As opposed to the last room, which did have pillars. It's more intimate, so every seat is a good seat. It has that bar attached to it, which I think is going to be some kind of a hangout for artists. I mean, as you probably noticed, I had original art prints from a guy named Paul Perrier who did a series, very interesting photographer, who did a series of studies of comics in very unusual poses. And there were 5 big blow-ups of those on the wall. We've got another 5. We're going to rotate them, but they're kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah, there's Sean Cullen, Jeremy Haas.
Yeah, but not just a shot of Sean Cullen.
Right.
It's Sean Cullen.
Not a headshot.
No, it's not a headshot. It's Sean Cullen puffing out his gut, and in a
very large shot,
odd way. So I think that art gallery bar that's attached to it might be used for various purposes, and I'm not really sure what yet. I want to see how it works.
Yeah, it's sort of a work in progress, isn't it? Opening a new club where you're not sure. I mean, there's bugs to work out the kinks.
Well, the audience will tell you what you want to know. You just have to watch the audience and listen to the audience. You'll see how they use the room, and then we'll have a much better idea of what to do with it. Will they linger in that other room after the show? Or will this be something they'll want to do before the show? I can't tell you. We'll just have to see how it evolves.
Well, what was your thoughts last night?
My thoughts were, first of all, I saw 20 acts I'd never seen before in Vancouver.
Oh, I was going to ask you about that.
No, I'd never seen any of the... Oh, I'm sorry. I saw one person before. But basically, I saw... they were all new to me. And every single person who was on had something to offer. Of the 20, I'd certainly say half of them were ready for prime time. And that was really
define
gratifying.
That, prime time.
Meaning I could put them on a weekend show, and people would pay $20 to see a headliner. But when I put this somebody on who was local and new, they wouldn't feel cheated. They wouldn't feel that the quality of the show had dropped. Some of them only have maybe 10 good minutes, but the minutes that they have are high quality, and that's what's really important. Right. So I was really impressed with the acts I didn't know. And, of course, there's lots of acts in Vancouver I do know.
Sure. Yeah. So that was one aspect of the club last night. Anything else?
Well,
Like
we were
physically.
we were also trying to just see how the systems would work.
Good sound system.
Yep.
Good lights.
Yep. All those
From what I
things,
could tell.
Yeah, all those things are good. I mean, it's funny because in a comedy club, the customer's really paying for what's not in the room.
Explain.
Well, if you go to see a comedy show in a regular bar, it's a one-nighter somewhere, and somebody says comedy tonight at Bob's Sports Bar. Okay, so what you're doing is you're having the comic fight the bad sight lines. You're having the comic fight the noise level of the room. You're having the comic fight the big screens with the game on.
Yeah.
That's a killer. You're having the how about the drink machine that makes those wonderful blender drinks in the middle of somebody's act going. So in a comedy club, any comedy club worth its salt, none of those things happen. It's bare. The focus is on the entertainer, and that's the way it should be.
And you have that. I mean,
yeah.
That is good. Now the location we don't know yet, right? There hasn't been a nightclub in that part of town.
No, but we're not.
Has there, Kevin?
A nightclub? No, there was a bar. It was
Okay.
a very successful bar.
It's not the thing is Yuk Yuk's isn't technically really a nightclub. It's really more of a theater where you can happen to have a drink than a nightclub. When I think of a nightclub, I think of dancing and people picking each other up, and it's not really for that. However, it's right across from the SkyTrain, which means that people from the suburbs can easily get there. It also means people who like to drink and not want to drive home can easily get there and back home with impunity. It's across from City Hall, so it's landmark. And what's interesting to me is just up the block, there's a Whole Foods and a Milestones. Now, if you know anything about these kinds of companies, they're wealthy companies that have a lot of money for market research. And I feel they spent the market research money that I didn't have to spend because I think that the customers for Milestones and Whole Foods are very similar to what the Yuk Yuk customer might be.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, I do.
Explain that one.
No, it's in terms of age, demographic, income level, education level, I think that's probably, we've always had sort of young, kind of educated middle-class audience that are going to come. It's not really that much of a student hangout because it's a bit too expensive for that. And yet it's certainly not the crowd that goes to the theater. Although, unfortunately, with the closing of the Vancouver Playhouse, I'm not sure who goes to the theater anymore. Mm-hmm. I go to the theater. I like the theater. But
you are a thespian.
But I'm a thespian, yes.
In drag.
A closet thespian. But I think that the audience is kind of similar. So somebody else did some market research to determine that was a good strip. The strip is lively. There's a lot of traffic on it, and there's a lot of good retail on it. So that's good. So I think that we're in good shape, and there's parking, and I think we're going to draw a lot from places like Kitts and Oak Street and around in there, and plus anybody from the West End. It's only a quick drive across. It's not rush hour. When you have to do that, you cross the bridge. It's not when it's not rush hour. That's easy to do. Certainly not. I don't consider it a suburb.
Right.
I consider it.
No, not at all.
If it were in Toronto, I would consider it Midtown. Mm-hmm. Those people who know Toronto, I would consider it Yonge and Eglinton. It would have that kind of socioeconomic demographic.
And it's good to be back in BC, isn't it? Just for the brand.
Yes, of course. We've always assumed that we were, C to fucking C, I think was our one of our slogans for a while. But we're in St. John's, Newfoundland. We should be in, Vancouver.
Yeah, you would think. And now, of course, 2 clubs in Vancouver proper, a third one out in New West. Edmonton has a few clubs.
Yes.
People always say, "Oh, can it work? Can it work?" I think, well, why not?
Well, there's a point where there would be too much competition, and the clubs would cannibalize each other's audience. A general rule of thumb is that a city can have one comedy club per 500,000 people or under. So Toronto has 4 clubs, and it has 2 million people. How many people in Vancouver? 2 million?
Yeah,
roughly.
in the greater area.
Yeah, in the greater area. So 2 million, and you've got 3 comedy clubs so there's 1.5 million. So I think that all the clubs should be able to survive. I don't think the clubs could survive 7 clubs or 8 clubs. Manhattan can do that. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, even in Manhattan, it still falls under that sort of those numbers because Manhattan has about 6 million people, and I think there's like 11 clubs.
All right. So
Right.
it could use a few more.
So 500,000.
Put a Yuk Yuk's in Manhattan.
Yeah, that's a whole trip on itself. I'd love to do that, but it's easier said than done.
Of course, you'd like to squash the competition.
No, I don't want to squash anybody. I just want to be successful. And if somebody else is successful after I'm successful, then that's just fine. No, really, it would actually say something rather sad about this city if it can't support pretty small clubs when you think about it. I mean, these are clubs with 200, 250 people in them. That's not 700, 800 seat venues. They should survive. They should both survive. I can't talk about the thing in New West. I've never been there, and I don't know anything about New West. But the downtown clubs should survive. Both of them should survive.
You would think. No, I totally agree. There's usually a headliner for 5 shows a week, give or take. And, fans can go out to both.
Yes, but in reality, most people don't go to a comedy club twice in 1 week,
They go about once every 6 months.
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, we've done our demographic research, and that's absolutely true. They go out about once every 6 months, the average customer to a comedy club. So that's why you need so many people to support a club, and why you can't put a comedy club in a city or a town of, say, 60,000 people. It just won't work. It just won't work. There just aren't the raw numbers to make it work. I mean, we have one-nighters. We have in addition to our 17 clubs across the country, we have one-nighters peppered all over through Canada. But it's Bob's Bar and Grill in Belleville on Tuesday is Yuk Yuk night.
Right.
And we send people out there. But we couldn't do Tuesday and Wednesday in Bob's Bar and Grill in Belleville.
We're talking with Mark Breslin, the founder of Yuk Yuk's, Mark Breslin's Yuk Yuk's Comedy Club chain. 17 clubs across the country and a new one in Vancouver. The show is What's So Funny? I'm Guy McPherson. This is CFRO 102.7 FM. And, of course, the one here in Vancouver is at Cambie and 12th at the old, Jolly Alderman Pub.
Yes,
for you
Jolly Alderman.
For you old-timers out there. Mark, you mentioned seeing 20 comics last night, all new to you. You like watching comics at the front end of their careers? Do you go regularly to the open mic nights?
I'm at the amateur night in Toronto, where I live, at least once every 3 weeks, maybe even more often. And then, of course, I do more formal showcases about 4 times a year. In addition to that, of course, remember, I've got my job at Humber College, as...
Where you're teaching them.
I'm not actually teaching. I'm more of a mentor, but I'm very involved in watching those people at a very nascent part of their career. The truth is, I prefer to watch people when they're really young and green and making mistakes.
So you can mold them.
Nah, I can't really mold them. I don't have the time to mold anybody. I wish I could. It would be great if I had the time to be able to do that, but I can't do that. This is a learn by doing experience, so whatever you might tell them can help a bit, but you really have to go on stage. It's all about the stage time you put in. It's not that different than bodybuilding. You can tell somebody, you should eat more protein, but you can't actually do the exercises for them. They have to do the exercises themselves. But I like people at the nascent level because it's raw. It's real. It's gritty. When people don't know what they're doing, they sometimes stumble on brilliant ideas. Before they know there's a certain way of doing this, I guess I better do it within the box of how things are done. No, I like the creativity that comes with ignorance. Ignorance is bliss, and this is what we were talking about before we started to go live, is that I talked about the cult of the amateur and how great amateurism can be in the arts.
Right, but don't you find that they could be a little derivative because they are fans and they go into it thinking, I got to sound like a comedian, or here's my favorite guy and I'm going to...
Sure. And not everybody who goes on an open mic night deserves to become a comic. But you're panning for gold, or at least for silt. And you might find one out of every 10 has some real potential. Remember, on an open mic night, a lot of people go down, they do it, they never do it again. It was a dare. Right. It was on their bucket list. They could cross it off. I don't count those people, but I count people who really want to do it, who are serious for various reasons and think they might actually want to do it as a living. I like them when they're fresh and green and they're not bitter about the business, or they're not trying to do it as some kind of corporate involvement. Nothing bothers me more than when comics come to me early on in their careers and they got a briefcase and they whip out a 5-year plan and say, "What do you think of that?" Because I didn't get into this business so that I could deal with people who had 5-year plans. I don't even have a 5-minute plan, guy. I fly by the seat of my pants, and that's the best way to fly.
Yeah. Would your father have said that?
That he flies by the seat of his pants, or that I fly by the seat of my pants?
No, that's the way to do it.
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I mean, my father was a pretty conservative guy.
Yeah.
Although I only met my father later in his life because he had me quite late. He was 53 when I was born, so I didn't really know him and understand him till he was in his mid-60s. And by time anybody's in their mid-60s, they kind of slow down and they become kind of conservative.
Yeah. I don't know how old you are, but
I'll be 60 in May.
Do you find yourself inching towards conservatism?
No, not really.
Do you have to fight it like consciously and go, I don't want to do that?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by conservatism. I mean, if you mean political conservatism,
No.
definitely not.
No.
Lifestyle conservatism, I don't have the taste for public rudeness that I once did. But other than that, I love experimentation. I love new things. The only thing that I can't... music is the place where I've kind of been left behind.
Right.
As many people who are my age will tell you.
It's hard to keep up.
It's hard to keep up, but everything sounds derivative to me. So, somebody will say, "Hey, you got to listen to this band. They're really good. They're like the Kinks. You should listen to them. They're called The Strokes." So you put them on and you go, "Hey, they're pretty good, but I should be listening to the Kinks."
That reminds me.
That's
Yeah.
right. So music is where I've been left behind a bit.
But don't you find that a bit in comedy too?
No.
You've heard so much.
There's always something new. There's always something fresh. Sure. Back in the 70s when everything seemed absolutely new to me, I was laughing out loud at a lot of shows, and now I'm more likely to sit back, intellectualize the process, and say, that's funny.
Yeah.
And it's so true when you get a whole bunch. You go to Just for Laughs and you sit at the back of the room with a bunch of industry people and no one's laughing. But it doesn't mean that people aren't enjoying themselves. It just means they're not laughing.
Thank you. Last night I had a young comic come up to me and said, "Are you sitting stone-faced again tonight?" And I go, "I'm enjoying it."
You're enjoying it. You've just passed the point where it's an emotional experience and it's transitioned into an intellectual one.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly valid.
You got past it, or you just never got into
I
it?
never got into it. Yeah, I was never much of a laugher, but that's besides the point. Sometimes, and the element of surprise when you kind of heard the
Sure.
form.
But you bring up a point that I think is probably important. One of the difficult things in my life is that as somebody who's heard too much comedy, I very frequently establish standards that are way higher than my audience would, and that probably is unfair to my audience. Because although I've heard every flying joke that could possibly be written, my audience hasn't necessarily heard it. It's kind of like when you go on Rotten Tomatoes and you check the scores between the critics and the public.
Right.
And the public scores are almost always higher than the critics' scores. Because if you only see 12 movies a year, everything seems fresh.
That's right.
If you see 300 movies a year, and by the way, I do, which is a whole other career I have now, writing film criticism for Metro. I'm their film guy
critic.
with Richard Krause.
Oh, that's got to be soul deadening.
No. Why? Why would you say that?
I always wonder. I always think of Roger Ebert, who just sees a million movies. It's just like, you got to sit through so much dreck, and it's not 20 minutes or 15 minutes. It's an hour and a half.
Better than having to review novels.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I mean, who has the time for that?
One every 6 months.
That's why people want to become movie critics, by the way, because it's relatively easy. It is only an investment of 90 minutes, as opposed to anything else, which is much longer.
But we can find these online?
Yeah,
all
the past ones
reviews
are online,
Okay.
and it's every Friday, front page of the entertainment section in Metro.
Excellent. I will check that out. But back to the comics. What do you watch for with these young comics?
I look for originality. That's always what I look for. That's the first thing. That's the most important thing. If it feels like something I haven't heard before, then I'm perking up right away. Then there's other things that come in after that. Character. Great comics have great characters. Even if they're saying very little, they're telling you a lot about themselves. To the point where somebody like Jack Benny, all he had to do was hold his elbow up and touch his face with his hand and say, "Well," and it spoke volumes. But what I'm really looking for is a comic flaw in somebody's personality. a deliberate comic flaw. I'll give you examples. It's like these are things that in real life you would never want to know this person because they would be just too much to bear. But aestheticized at a distance and exaggerated, they become fascinating and funny. Like Jerry Seinfeld is fussy, or Roseanne is vulgar, or Woody Allen is neurotic. So you're looking for some kind of iconic comic flaw that will inform every piece of work that they do. And that's when you know you've stumbled onto a genius.
Interesting. So, are there exceptions to this? The
Yes.
exceptions prove the rule.
Yes. Some exceptions are people who are, ace commentators on a political and social scene. Like, I don't think that's true of Bill Maher. I don't think that's true of Dennis Miller. I don't think that's true of Jon Stewart. They're what I think of as journalistic comics, and they don't need, their character isn't really central to what they're doing. It's the ideas. They're idea comics.
Yeah. Sam Kinison?
Oh, he had a flaw. He was decadent.
Yeah.
Definitely decadent. And of course, I loved Sam, and we were very, very close.
Yes, I was going to ask you about him because he was on the Yuk Yuk's album that you put out. What year was that?
2 years ago.
Oh, yeah,
that new
the
one,
original one.
Sorry, that's true. That's true. Sorry, you're right. He was on the bonus disc of the one 2 years ago, but he's also on the one that's just came out like 3 months ago.
Oh, is he?
Yeah.
The same set from the 50th 20th minute?
No, it's a different set.
Yeah.
It's a different
set.
set.
So you had him
used.
working up at Yuk Yuk's in Toronto.
Because he couldn't get hired anywhere else.
So where did you see him?
Well, I went down to Los Angeles. I guess it would have been about 1982, 83. I'm not really good with dates. But I would do that from time to time to see if I could find anybody worth bringing up. And I would say to the people at the Comedy Store, I'm coming down. Can you put on some people I might want to book? And they would. And there would be 12, 15 acts on, and I'd watch it. Then they would come over to me and say, okay, the showcase is over. I hope you saw somebody you like. We're just going to put on a guy now who clears the audience.
I heard that about him.
Yes, he just clears the audience. So, you can leave if you want.
It's like 1 in the morning or something?
Yeah, 1 in the morning. And this guy gets up, and he's absolutely brilliant. Unformed, but brilliant. And then the Comedy Store people come up to me and say, so, who are you going to book? I said, I think the last guy. And they went, the last guy? Kinison? Kinison? You're going to book Sam Kinison? I said, yeah. And I did. And the very first time I booked him, he absolutely bombed. Bombed worse than anybody has ever bombed in the history of bombing. He cleared the entire room. You know how hard it is to clear an entire room? Inevitably somebody hasn't paid their bill, or inevitably somebody's, just sort of sleepy. No, he cleared every single person from the room. There were 116 people that night in the club, and he cleared them all.
Were you there?
Yes, of course. And I went backstage, and I pulled out $100 from my wallet. And I guess Sam thought, okay, he's paying me my $100 for the night, and he's going to fire me. I said, Sam, this is $100 for you. This is a bonus. And you will get that $100 every single night you clear the room. But you have to clear absolutely everybody from the room, or you don't get your bonus. Well, he was stupefied by this. He took the $100, of course. And for the rest of the week, he didn't quite clear everybody from the room. But it wasn't a success, guy. It wasn't a success at all. And everybody thought I'd made a big mistake. I brought him back about maybe a year later. The act was different. The act was polished. He'd found how to create a mood between himself and the audience. He wasn't just screaming. He was modulating now. And he got good response. And then I brought him back about 6 months after that, and it was the Sam Kinison that you and I, would know, and he brought down the house. So sometimes you invest in someone, and they come through for you. And then there have been other people that I've tried out. I'm right most of the time, but when I make a mistake, wow, do I make a mistake.
That same kind of thing where you're giving them bonuses for walk in the room?
I never did that with anybody else.
Okay.
It just felt like the right thing to do at that time. It was kind of a funny thing to do, but I never had to do it.
I mean, he was walking them for the right reasons, you felt.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I knew there was something, when we hear something new in art, it always sounds ugly until it sounds beautiful. So in 1913, there were riots outside the Paris Opera when Stravinsky premiered The Rites of Spring. I think it's funny that people would riot over opera, but that sounds from a bit of another era. But now, I mean, the Rites of Spring and Stravinsky, it's considered just
beautiful.
it's part of the canon of classical music. So sometimes things just sound off to our ears until we get used to it. Sometimes you can do that with food. You can taste something and it tastes awful, and you try it again, and you try it a third time, and actually, this is kind of interesting. These anchovies aren't all bad. I like the anchovies of the world. I like a challenging taste.
So, and Sam Kinison was the Sam Kinison that we all know when he came back. Was he the same guy, or had the decadence got to him?
Well, let's just say Sam was able to use his fame to pursue the vices he always wanted to pursue.
Right.
Sam would come. Here's a Sam Kinison story, which I love this story. He got a part on the Three Amigos, which was the Lorne Michaels film, with Martin Short,
Steve Martin,
that's
Chevy
right.
Chase.
And it was filming out in rural Montana. To do the part, he had to fly out to rural Montana. And Sam was notorious for missing plane flights. He was being handled by William Morris at the time, and this was his first real movie role. So they sent out a junior from William Morris to his house, and they said, make sure Sam gets on the plane. Your job, junior agent, is to go to his house, pick him up, drive him to the airport, get him on the plane, then come back to the office. Time passes. They wait for the guy to come back to the office. He doesn't come back. They check. Sam never made the plane. So they sent a second agent out to the house. Knocks on the door. Sam opens it. Says, hey, brother, come on in. And he goes into the house, and in the backyard, there's the first agent in the hot tub, high as a kite, surrounded by 3 penthouse pets. And that's why I love Sam Kinison, because he's a trickster god. He was always a trickster god. Not an attractive guy. No, but he was sleeping with his best friend's wife openly. He was sleeping with his best friend's wife openly in a kind of weird threesome that they had. He would come to Yuk Yuk's and he would seduce all the women. And again, not an physically attractive guy. But that's how much personal charisma the man had.
Yeah. Charisma and confidence.
Yeah, he was amazing. Once we were driving around and he said, let me show you this. Let me play something for you. And he puts on a cassette tape. That dates it. He puts on a cassette tape of him as a circuit preacher, which is what he did before he did comedy. And Guy, it was the same act, except it didn't have jokes. But the cadences were exactly the same. The things he was talking about were exactly the same. They just didn't have jokes. I thought that was mind-blowing.
We were talking with Mark Breslin of Yuk Yuk's. The show's What's So Funny on CFRO 102.7 FM. I'm Guy McPherson. Back to the young comics and what you watch for. And you mentioned something earlier about audiences, right? They may only go to a comedy club twice a year.
Correct.
Right? So do you take into account audience reaction? For me, personally, I hate audience reaction because I don't trust their judgment. But on the other hand, you're a club owner and or club impresario. You want to see that the people are having a great time.
I'm trying to put the imp back in impresario, by the way. But look, they're customers. I have to satisfy the paying customers. They have to be happy with what they see. But I've always thought the job of a producer of any kind was to stretch their audience just a bit. So, people come in expecting X, and you want to give them X plus a little bit. You can only stretch them so far. But I think they want to be stretched a little bit. They want to be surprised. They want to get more than they bargained for. This is one of the problems in entrepreneurship or business. People always say, give the customer what they want. But people didn't want green garbage bags until green garbage bags existed. People didn't want iPods until iPods existed. So we're trying to give our customers something that's what they want, but a little more and a little different.
There's a difference between giving them what they want and pandering.
That's correct. That's right. Yeah. And I don't want to pander to the audience either. So I try to provide challenging comics, but they have to be challenging in a way that people understand them. And I've always thought Yuk Yuk's was always a place where the alternative meets the mainstream.
The alternative meets the mainstream. Yeah.
It's a place that people cross over from being, what I think of as, maybe coffee house comics performing for 25 people into something where they can actually learn how to play a room with, 200-300 seats. And we've always prided ourselves on trying to find cutting edge people who can wind up doing material that's good for them and for the audience.
Yeah, you guys have always been ahead of the curve in the free speech aspect of you're not trying to tell your comics what they can and can't say on stage.
Never, never. Because, who am I to censor anybody? Because I don't want to be censored myself. But also because I think the audience censors the comic by not laughing. And, if the comic doesn't get laughs, the comic will, through the biofeedback loop of the performance situation, change their material, adapt their material, put a joke in a different place till it does work. That's why comics are performing in these clubs. It isn't for the big money, It's for to get the art form perfect. They're like gyms. So you want to make sure that you're doing the proper reps, and you'll only know that by doing them, getting the feedback, and then changing them.
Well, these days, of course, it's nothing unusual, right? Because we hear the ideas and the language everywhere, from movies to cable TV.
Absolutely. When we first started, a third of the audience walked out on us. A third of the audience walked out, and they didn't walk out in a nice way. They walked out by, slamming their drink on the table and walking out and screaming some anti-Semitic epithet at me. So they weren't happy, that's for sure. But now I think because of cable television and a lot of other things, certainly the internet, the whole culture has caught up with us. So it's no longer, what we do is no longer offensive to most people unless they're, deeply religious or, from Ohio.
Right. Now, but nowadays you have the whole politically correct movement, and people will be offended whether they feel it at a gut level or not. Like, in which era, say, when you were starting out in the 70s or now, are you finding more people getting upset?
No. It was the 70s for sure, because people still thought they were going to see Red Skelton. They had no idea what they were going to watch. And as far as the political correctness thing, I think that's peaked, and I think it peaked somewhere in the mid-90s.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, definitely. The feminists have, the militant feminists have admitted they've lost that particular battle. They've admitted it.
Yeah.
They've admitted it. That's why they've changed their attack to things like fair wages and things that are much more important, I think, anyway, than somebody saying, calling some woman a name or something. Mm-hmm. And our whole culture has become more sexualized. Look at the Kardashians and primetime TV. You go to the mall and you see 12-year-olds dressed like little sluts. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying that...
that you notice them.
That you notice them and they're there. Yeah, of course I notice them. I'm just saying that they're there, and the culture has changed significantly. It's much freer. It's much looser, at least in the places I do business. If I went to, rural Ohio or rural Pennsylvania, where Rick Santorum reigns, it could be very different there. But we're not there. We're in big cities.
What advice do you give to the young comics, if any? I'm sure that if you see, a diamond in the rough, you will try to help them out in some way.
Sure, of course. They always want my feedback, and I give them the feedback. The feedback's only a line here or a line there. But I have said things as simple as speed it up, or in other cases, slow it down. Or I've said, I think your entire act is a lie.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because it's not really true to who they are, I can tell. Mm-hmm. I can tell that they're just doing what they think a comic should be doing. But sometimes I'll say something as elliptical as, you know what you need to do? I'll say to a young comic, you need to sell everything you have, whatever little you have, and you need to go to Europe with a pack on your back. And you need to travel around for 6 months. You need to find a countess, and you need to woo her, and you need to fail with her. And when you're finished doing that, come back and do some comedy here.
Do you think comics need a bit more life before, like 19-year-olds starting out doing comedies? Sometimes it's great, sometimes, more often than not, it's not.
What do the computer people always say? Garbage in, garbage out? And also the nutrition people say garbage in, garbage out. So I'm always pushing people to do things like go to art galleries and, read books and things. But I'm a voice in the wilderness when it comes to that. So I can say it all I like. It doesn't mean anything. People just sit around in front of the TV set and they smoke dope and they order a pizza and they think of something really funny and it works. So what do I know?
You did comedy for many years. Do you still
20
call yourself a comedian? When did you stop?
Mid-90s.
Yeah.
I hung up my microphone undefeated. It started to feel like I'd done it already, and unless I was going to spend a lot of time developing a lot of new material, I shouldn't do it anymore because I was just too busy. The business had grown in leaps and bounds, and if I can't put 100% into it, it shouldn't be done. I had my innings. Let's just say that. I had my innings and they were glorious. But I don't like doing anything halfway. And I would have had to do it halfway. I still go on stage from time to time. I do sort of corporate speaking, entrepreneurship lectures, and I make those as funny as I possibly can. But they're not stand-up comedy, and I know that.
Right. And now you can get it out in the written word when you're in your reviews.
Yes, but there's nothing ever like going on stage, thinking about a night, thinking about a joke at 2:00, and at 8:00 you go on stage and you say it, and people laugh. Nothing will ever replace that, ever in my life. That's just something that isn't in my life anymore.
Do the young comics coming up know that you were a stand-up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But they never seen what I did in most cases, and because when I was performing, it wasn't like today where everything is documented. People are obsessively documenting themselves all the time with their little cell phones. And when I was performing, if you wanted to actually document yourself, you had to bring in a camera that was as big as a room, and rent it. The cost was prohibitive. It just didn't happen. Some people got lucky and did television shots, but my stuff was not the kind of stuff you did on TV. So I have a couple of shots from the Alan Thicke show, and I think I have something from a couple of other shows I did, which are muted versions of what I did way back then. But that's about it. My stuff is passed into legend like it's ghostly now.
Well, I want to play a clip for some people who might not have heard your stand-up.
Okay, fine.
Here's Mark Breslin from the 50th Funny Minutes Ever, and it was also released on your audiobook.
Correct.
Which was called?
Well, the first one was Yuk Yuk's Guide to Stand-Up Comedy, Canadian Stand-Up.
Mm-hmm. And what year is this?
When I would have done this?
Yeah.
81?
Here's Mark Breslin.
A little later on tonight, something kind of unique here at Yuk Yuk's. We'll be having our Yuk Yuk's dry t-shirt contest. That's right, we get about 4 or 5 young ladies up from the audience, put them on stage, sprinkle them with talcum powder, and watch their nipples invert. If you like Yuk Yuk's, I want to recommend some of our Yuk Yuk's goods and services. One I'd really like to recommend is our Yuk Yuk's Caligulagram. Lots of fun. Call us up. We send over a guy, and he rapes a pig in your front lawn. An ideal greeting for weddings, anniversaries. Not recommended for bar mitzvahs. And tonight's show, of course, brought to you courtesy of Sofa King. You'll know it's Sofa King because it's Sofa King good. Come on. Like an old whore once said to me, what do you want for $8? And I told her. And I got it. And I still have it. Another product I'd like to recommend, of course, is my new Mark Breslin exercise video, 20 Minutes to a Slimmer Wrist. A companion piece to the 20-minute workout. A lot of people get upset about that joke because it's about masturbation. I like to talk openly about masturbation. That's because I like to masturbate. There's no joke there, I just wanted to tell you that. I like to masturbate. I do. I really like to masturbate. Do you masturbate, Stella? Do you masturbate? Yes? All the time? When you masturbate, do you use a vibrator? Yes? Good. Now, when you use your vibrator, do you crank it all the way up to 9? Do you just stop at 8 because you want to keep a little magic in that relationship? Do you not turn the vibrator on at all because you want the vibrator to get to know you as a person first? I thought so. Do you fantasize? I bet you do. Yeah, you do, Stella. You go, ooh, David Bowie, David Bowie, David Bowie. Lance, how about you? You fantasize with your vibrator? You go, ooh, Liberace, Liberace, Liberace. I thought so. You doing all right? Good. Stella, you weren't offended by that. You really enjoyed it, as a matter of fact, didn't you? I did that for a reason, Stella. Well, I did it to meet you. See, I wanted to make contact with you, Stella. Because when I walked out here tonight, Stella, I looked around at the audience and I saw a lot of faces, but I only saw one pair of eyes that I wanted to merge with. And those eyes belong to you, Stella, because I've been doing a lot of therapy lately with a San Diego psychotherapist. A very interesting guy who's, well, he's a guy now, but a very interesting guy who's getting me in touch with my feelings. And what he's teaching me is that I should get totally in touch with my feelings, be totally honest with people anywhere I am, no matter where I am, no matter what I'm doing, no matter that I don't need any props, that I don't have to wear a mask, that we can talk to each other, that if I come out here and I see a woman I like and I'm attracted to, that I can talk to her, that I can get down on my knees, that I can howl. What are you people staring at? You never seen a Jew before?
Now that's stand-up comedy. Mark Breslin, our guest here this week on What's So Funny. Mark, what are your thoughts as you're listening back to that?
I had a lot of fun doing that. Can you hear the fun in my voice? Do
Yeah.
I seem like I'm having a good time? I was having the time of my life as I listen to this now. The other things that hit me about this, because I haven't heard that track in a while, you know all the stuff at the end where I'm doing the stuff about Stella and the howling and all that? Well, a lot of my stuff came from a lot of kind of experimental psychotherapy that I was doing since I was about 18. I was doing Primal Scream and I was doing encounter sessions, and I started making fun of that stuff. And that's where all that material came from, that, you got to be honest and open with people, even if they're complete and total strangers, real touchy-feely stuff, SLN experiment stuff. And I think I was one of the few people who was doing that and referred to that stuff in comedy. The second thing that occurs to me is how much of that material was written really from the point of view of an MC. The material would not have made much sense, but the first part of the stuff wouldn't have made much sense if I had just been brought on as an act. But as an MC, I talked about being an MC, so I was always self-referential and kind of postmodern in that sense. And I wish more MCs today wouldn't just go up there and say, "Hi everybody, nice to be here," and then launch into their act. I wish they would do what comedy clubs are all about, which is breaking the fourth wall. I don't like it when headliners do that, but MCs should be all about that. You go to the theater and you can't interrupt the monologue. Hamlet has to say what he has to say.
Yeah.
But if you go to a comedy club, one of the great things about it is that you don't have to have a fourth wall. You can talk directly back and forth between the audience and the performer. And I was a big believer in that. And I think that also shows up in there. And then the third thing that shows up is just how sexual or mock sexual so much of the material was. Which, well, it was because that's what I was interested in at the time, I guess.
And what would today's Mark Breslin take, if you took that younger Mark Breslin aside, what would you tell him?
I would tell him he was doing the right thing.
He was fantastic.
Yeah, I would tell him he was doing the right thing. He's getting lots of laughs, and the timing was great. The timing was great. I would also tell him, however, that although at Yuk Yuk's you can do this kind of material, and we will protect you and we will book you, you might be putting a limit on what you actually can do out there in the world, because television producers will run away from that material. And remember, this was pre-cable, pre-internet. They will run away from that material. You will never get people interested. The gatekeepers will be creeped out by all of this stuff. And I remember even years before this, way back in 1978 or 79, Rick Moranis, who actually started doing stand-up at Yuk Yuk's before he started doing SCTV, and was a good friend of mine at the time, would beg me not to work Blue. Because he said, "You'll never go anywhere. Mark, you have talent, but no one will touch you with this stuff." And it was true, actually. No one would. When I finally did shows like the Alan Thicke Show, it was only because Alan asked me to do it personally. His bookers would come to town. I would host a show. They would book all kinds of people and never book me. Then I ran into Alan Thicke, and he said, "How come you never want to do my show?" And I said, "Alan, I want to do your show, but your bookers won't have me on." He said, "I'll change that." And he did, but then when I got there, they tried to change every single word that I had.
Really?
And I said to them, "Look, I've already censored myself. don't worry, I'm not going to swear. I'm not going to say anything the CRTC is going to object to. And they said, we're not worried about that. But every single joke is about necrophilia, incest, pedophilia. It's like a Kraft Ebbing of comedy. And of course it was.
Masturbation, yeah. Last time you were here, you talked about being the booker on the Joan Rivers show and the Late Show after that. And you said you were pretty hands-off. Like, you wouldn't do what they were doing to you, the Alan Thicke people.
No, I was on, remember, that was the first show on Fox, and Fox had a different mandate that would be very clear once shows like Married with Children would be on. They wanted controversy. They wanted to push the envelope. So it was a dream job. And, of course, working with Joan, when Joan was my boss, was the best because, no one goes further than Joan. Mm-hmm. So she was thrilled that I was finding acts that, weren't all white bread.
Yeah.
It was a perfect job. Guy, it was the most perfect job imaginable.
And how long did it last?
Well, it lasted 9 months with Joan there, and then I got a promotion to actually produce the entire Late Show, and that lasted another 6 months. And that wasn't as good. It was a better job. I had a bigger office. I had more perks, and I made more money. But I had to do things like decide which soap star would fit best on the show. And I know nothing about soap stars. Here's an example of something I did wrong in my career. If I look back on it, I asked for the wrong thing. Joan quit on a Friday, and I responded by not going to the show. That Saturday afternoon, I was in the pool. I was renting a house with a pool, and I was in the pool, and I heard a knock on the door. And I got dressed, ran up, and it was the vice president of Fox, who said he was just driving by. Now, I got to tell you, I lived in the hills, and sometimes I couldn't find my own house. That's how hard it was. So he wasn't just driving by. He wanted to come in, and he offered me the job of producing the whole show. He said, we really like what you do. And what I should have said instead of yes is, Kevin, because Kevin Wendell, said, Kevin, what do I know about soap stars? And how much do I really know about music? I really know comedy. So why don't I keep the job I have now booking the comics, find somebody else to actually produce the show, and give me a job in development at Fox to find you some, the next comedy stars that you can build sitcoms around. Because really, my job only takes me 3-4 hours a day in the office. I have another 4 hours, and I can do that. And if I'd done that, who knows where my career would have gone, because it was a fledgling network. But I didn't know what to ask for.
So you just said yes, of course.
I just said yes.
Because it was a promotion.
Yeah, it was a promotion. I said yes. But looking back on it, it wasn't the best job for me because it asked me to be an expert in something I didn't know about.
Right.
But I continued in the job. They didn't get rid of me. They just got rid of the entire show and replaced it, if you remember, a little bit of history, with Wilton North Report, which was produced by the ex-producer of David Letterman, Barry Sand, and was an attempt to take Spy magazine and make it into a TV show, which was a great idea. But it didn't work, and it only lasted, I think, 6 weeks, and then that was gone.
So when your job ended, what did you do?
I sat in my beautiful penthouse in Hollywood and tried to figure out what to do next. Because you see, I knew nobody in Hollywood. Most people who have great jobs get them by, going up one step at a time. I was parachuted in at the top, so it wasn't like I could go to people I'd worked with before and say, "Hey, I'm out of work, give me a job." So I sort of sat around, did very little, and had some meetings, and dated starlets, and then came home.
Who did you date?
No names
Come
mentioned.
on,
No
Mark.
names
Your
mentioned.
life is an open book.
No names
Mark.
mentioned. Tom Cruise. Okay, I dated Tom Cruise. You wanted to hear it. Okay, I said it. There you go.
Damn, I thought we'd get a scoop. A real one, I meant. Hey, we don't have all day. You're a busy man. The club's opening tonight, but the day that we're recording this, the Emo Phillips is coming to town.
Yes, love emo.
Yes, I love. He was the first guy I ever reviewed, by the way.
Really?
Yeah, I think it was '93. He played Punchlines.
And did you give him a good review?
I gave him a great review.
Good.
Yeah, and he was a
deserves
guy. I was telling somebody this last night. He was a guy that prior to that experience, seeing him live, I hated him.
Really?
I hated him because I had only
Why?
seen him on Johnny Carson and Letterman, and you get about 5 minutes at that time. I couldn't get past his persona, his crazy, awkward, quirky delivery.
Yeah, the eccentricity of it. Yeah, the
and
delivery.
when I saw him live, it's about 10 minutes in, I forgot all about that because the joke writing was so masterful.
If you took his jokes and you gave them to somebody who just delivered them in a conventional way,
Yeah.
they'd still be funny.
Yes, and,
They'd still work. They'd still be funny.
yeah. So
But he's less mannered now than he was, say, 20 years ago. much less mannered now. He's still got the sing-song voice.
Yes, he does.
But he's not struggling to put together a trombone. Do you remember that era?
No. Do you mean with his arms over his head?
Yeah, but he had a trombone. He would bring a trombone on stage, and the entire act would be done while he tried to assemble a trombone.
No, I don't remember that.
Yeah, that was how when I first started booking him, that's what he was doing.
Yeah, but he is one of the greatest joke writers.
Yeah, one of the greatest.
I mean, forget Jay Leno saying that. I say that.
Yeah, I say that too.
Yeah. But so Yuk Yuk's here. You're proudly Canadian, and the roster, you say, what, 90% Canadian?
Yeah, I would say 90% of the people we book are Canadian. I would say that we put about $2 to $3 million a year into the hands of Canadian comics. That money stays in the country and sort of recycles through the economy.
Yeah, but what about if you just book the best comics, be they Canadian or American?
Well, I do. I just think that some of the best comics are Canadian.
Yeah, some of them are. I don't disagree with that. But certainly not all of them are.
Certainly not all of them are, which is why we've got Emo coming in, we've got Gilbert Gottfried coming in, we've got Nikki Glaser coming in.
Here to Vancouver?
Yes.
Oh, great.
I think the Mother's Day weekend. Sweet. And it's going to be some kind of an all-woman show.
Yeah.
We've got Lee Camp coming in. Do you know Lee Camp?
I do not.
Well, Lee Camp...
British?
Nope.
No.
Sounds like he's British, doesn't it? Lee Evans, I think you're thinking. No, Lee Camp is the next Bill Maher, probably. It's
really?
hard-hitting, left-wing, libertarian comedy. Very good stuff. He's the guy who punked Fox News. He went on Fox News on some show as a right-wing pundit and then tore them apart until they they took him off the air.
And he's a stand-up.
Yeah, he's a stand-up.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so we do bring in, but I never bring in an American who can do when a Canadian can do the job.
But everybody's their own entity.
Yes,
right?
but you have to admit there's a lot of clubs, and I'm not naming any clubs particularly, but there are a lot of clubs who will bring in people based on their credits. They came in fourth on Last Comic Standing in 1997 or whatever, and those people I don't need, and we don't need to see. Those people are generic, and I won't do it. I'll only bring in Americans if they're doing something really special.
I see. Because I was thinking, like the CFL, there's a percentage that have to be, or only a percentage of foreign players can come in, and those, of course, are all American.
I don't know that, but if you tell me that, that's...
Canadian content on the radio, music, right? There's 15 or 30, I don't know. Percent?
I think
it's more than that.
Okay,
actually,
50%.
Yeah, well, the government is certainly not going to get into the comedy world and say that a certain number of bookings are going to have to be Canadian. So I've done it, but that was one of my first beliefs back in 1976. I said I had two mandates: one, to create a Canadian comedy industry that hires Canadians first and foremost, and two, and we explored this, is that the material should be completely uncensored. Mm-hmm. I still believe those things 35 years later.
Have you changed your beliefs at all over the years? That maybe...
Well, I was an Orthodox Jew, and now I'm a Reformed Jew.
Okay. Are you a religious man?
Oh, God, no.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't think so.
No. In fact, it's interesting because Brian O'Gorman, who you're going to like, you've never seen him, have you?
No, I haven't.
You're going to like him. Brian has been running...
Oh, he's tonight, right?
Yes, he's the support act.
Okay.
And he's been running atheist nights, comedy nights at Yuk Yuk's once every 3 months. I think comics make great atheists. And the only reason I wouldn't call myself an atheist is because that's another ism as well. That's a belief system too. I'm a free thinker, not an atheist. So I even challenge atheism. But I think the important thing for me in life, and I think maybe for others, is to challenge thoughts as much as you possibly can. It keeps you alive mentally. So I urge people to accept nothing and to continuously challenge everything. Except me. I don't like people challenging me. But outside of me...
Now, you're only partly joking there, aren't you?
Well, you gotta push the rock uphill every day, says Camus. And if people are there, saying, you shouldn't push it that way. You should push it the other way. Wait, don't you want some extra hands? No, push it that way. Push it to the side. It's better. No, you got to push the rock up, and you got to complete the task. Too many cooks do spoil the broth, or too many cocks spoil the brothel. Either way.
So you make the rules. based on years of experience, and those are the rules.
Well, it could also be whim.
Whim.
If I wanted to, I suppose I could make the rules by
Emperor.
whim. And
Yeah.
sometimes whim actually is a good thing. Sometimes accident is a good thing. The role of accident in life really isn't something that's appreciated enough. I do a lot of entrepreneurial speaking, and all these my competitors in the business, it's all about you can control everything. If you just work hard enough, I don't believe in any of that. A lot of the things that have happened to me, the best things that have happened to me, have been accidents, including my most recent entrepreneurial effort, which is my 1-year-old boy.
Yes, I was going to get to that.
Did you like the way I transitioned into it? Because I knew you'd want to do that. People want to talk to me about that because there are not a lot of first-time 59-year-old fathers.
Yeah, you're just like your old man.
That's right.
He was 53.
That's right. But he had had children before.
Oh, okay.
I had 2 older sisters, so he'd already known what it was
Right.
like. For me, this is a completely new experience, and
you're just glad to be here in Vancouver for
oh,
a few
well,
days.
you go through different periods with comics. Comics come to me and they say, book me everywhere. I love to go. I have nothing holding me back. Book me everywhere. Then they come to me later and say, I just got married, so, only book me a few places. I'd like to sleep in my own bed, so I only want to do the clubs that are close to town. Then they come to me a few years later and say, I just had a kid, so book me everywhere. Book me everywhere.
Yeah. And it softened you?
No.
No.
I always had a soft side. I always had a vulnerable side. I always had a wussy side. And he's a beautiful boy. I love him. I generally don't like children. I don't relate to children. I didn't have much of my own childhood, really.
Planned child, this was?
Well, no. We had him the old-fashioned way. We got drunk and went to Mexico and got drunk. So I never.
It's the best way.
It is the best way, and it's funny because all my friends who are even 20 years younger than me, they want to have a child. They have to go to a doctor. Somebody has to get shots, or they have to, dribble into a tube, and then they put the tube in a hole. It's repulsive stuff. We just sort of said, you know what? Let's stop having any kind of birth control and see what happens. We'll leave it to nature. Now, that's interesting because if you know my wife, as well as knowing me, you know that we are not people who leave anything to chance. If I don't go to a restaurant without checking the menu on the internet first to make sure it's exactly what I want. And yet the most important decision you could make in your life, which is to bring life into this world, we left to chance.
Whim.
Right? So there's the advantage of whim. So don't don't look down your nose at me when I say, well, maybe it's just whim that I decide. Whim can take you to places that you wouldn't go to otherwise.
Hey, I just wanted to ask, because I know you got to go. You have another interview set up. But so comics, are they still like Yuk Yuk's comics? If you're working Yuk Yuk's, getting paid to work at Yuk Yuk's, you're not going to be over at the competition.
Generally speaking, that's true.
Now, but in the past, you've said that that people don't come to see individual comics. In fact, you had that famous thing where you put some dead names up or whatever, and,
yes.
and you still filled the club. So people aren't coming to see individual comics.
Well, it depends whom, of course.
Well, of course.
Like
if you bring in an Emo Phillips.
Yeah, that might make a difference, but there are other reasons. I think that you want to compete. You want to be very competitive in your business. And the best way to compete is on content. And so if you tell people generally, this is the place, you can see exclusive content. You can't see this anywhere else. There's a good chance that they'll come to see you. And that doesn't only apply to me, it applies to my competitor as well. Because if all comics played all places, the competition would exist on drink prices. And that's not very interesting to me. So I like picking our players, and you come see our band. That's how I look at it.
Otherwise, it would just be a generic comedy club experience.
Correct.
I see.
Correct.
You're a very persuasive guy, Mark Breslin.
I've had to be. When you're 5'2", you learn to be persuasive early on.
I was noticing last night with these 20 comics, a number of them could look you straight in the eye. And I was wondering, is there something about being of your stature that brings out comedy?
No, because there's also a lot of people who are remarkably obese in my business.
Yeah.
Obesity is a real serious problem. But I would say that most comics come from the margins, even if the margins are slight. And the margins being, they're too short, they're too tall, they're too fat, they're too skinny. They come from an ethnic group that is oppressed. They weren't loved by their parents. Or in my case, they were loved too much. Mm-hmm. And then they got out into the real world and were, hey, where's all the attention? So there's always something. So yeah, there's bound to be out of 20 statistically a certain number of short men. Also fat. There were also fat people on the show too.
Right. Okay. And we'll see all
There
these...
were bald. There were also bald people, Guy.
Not on the show.
But you didn't notice that, now did you?
Were there?
Yeah,
Really?
there were 2 bald guys.
Yeah, I didn't notice because they weren't as bald as I am.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, so Yuk Yuk's at Cambie and 12th, opening, well, it's open now by the time you hear this. It's opening tonight as we record with Emo Phillips, as you mentioned, some other great guests coming up, Gilbert Gottfried, Nikki Glazer.
Yeah, and Lee Camp. I think you don't want to miss Lee Camp.
Lee Camp, that's one to remember. Daryl Lennox is coming
Yeah, Daryl
back.
Lennox, the return of Daryl Lennox, who chose Yuk Yuk's.
Yeah, that's
to
good.
perform it.
Well, I mean, I look forward to it. I love the fact that there's 2 clubs in town.
And why shouldn't there be?
Yeah.
Because we're not doing what they do, and they're not doing what we do.
Although-
I would like to see I would like to see. Look, in the best of all possible worlds, in some kind of idealistic universe, comedy would be such a thing that everybody wanted to consume so much. There'd be a club of some kind of on every corner, and every day people would get up and say, "We need a laugh. Let's go to a comedy club tonight." But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So it's too bad because people do need to laugh.
Yeah.
They should go more often than every 6 months, no matter where they go.
But not every week like I do, because maybe that's too much.
That's too much.
Yeah.
And it's true. People used to come up to me in the street and they used to go, "Hey, I love your club. I go every week." And I'd say, Don't. Don't. You'll get
Right.
sick of it. You'll learn the tricks and then you won't come back anymore.
A good point.
I think people should go once every 2 months.
Once every 2 months.
Yeah, I think that's good. And then maybe fill in some, on the off month, maybe go to improv or go to a sketch comedy show.
Yeah. Or the theater.
Or the theater.
All right. Mark Breslin, always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you very much. And hope to see you back sometime soon.
Oh, yeah, I love the city, especially in the summer.
Yeah, come in the summer.
Yeah, I'll come in the summer.
All right, we got lots more to talk about.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. And we'll be back here next week at the same time, 11 p.m. on Co-op Radio, CFRO 102.7 FM. Good night.